Hi, Emily. Thank you very much. This is the third year in a row that I've been invited to this conference, and it's always one of the things that I look forward to. It's a big deal for me to talk to emergency managers. I have a master's degree in emergency and disaster management. I worked at FEMA for about 12 years. And then moved over to DHS, to the Center for Prevention Programs and Partnerships, and doing things in the prevention realm of targeted violence and terrorism, which I will be speaking to you today on. If There we go. So the objectives of this, it's going to be a lot of information. It's going to be a little bit of putting your mouth up to the fire hose, but I'll try to get through it as succinctly and as clearly as I can. But we'll talk a little bit about targeted violence and terrorism, radicalization and the pathway to violence, and how radicalization and mobilization is a little bit different. Our approach, which is a public health informed approach to violence prevention, identify resources both perhaps within Vermont or within your local, even more local, as well as some federal resources that you can get involved, which also happens to be SZA and Gabe Palazzi, who I know is going to be speaking to you later this afternoon. And then identify prevention tools and prevention programs that we can set you up with. So here's just some of the disclaimers. One of the things that I like to tell people, just so you kind of have a basic understanding of what my role here at DHS is, I am not law enforcement. I do not have any sort of law enforcement capabilities. I'm also not a mental health individual, so I don't take on any kind of cases. I'm not looking to insert myself into the existing infrastructures that you already have at the state and local level to deal with individuals who are of concerning behavior. You do not have to report those to me or anything like that. So my job is simply to push information out to the public, not pull any information from the public. There are some definitions that we want to go over with. Targeted violence is different than terrorism. So all terrorism is targeted violence, but not all targeted violence is terrorism. These are the definitions that we are using right now. Some people like to joke it's terrorism when they do it, it's counterterrorism when we do it. But getting out of the sort of joking aside and stuff like that, it's important to really realize what we're talking about when we start using the terms targeted violence and terrorism. So us, what can we provide at the Center for Prevention Programs and Partnerships? So we look at a whole of community type of approach towards preventing these attacks. So one of the things that we see is that there are a number of different networks within the state, local, federal community that sort of have a role in these individuals' lives that are not always as interconnected as the risk factors would have us that we see with these individuals. So they're very sort of stovepiped, or they address a certain risk factor, but they're not very interconnected. So part of the role that we are trying to do is trying to change that sort of framework away from sort of systems and networks and more into concepts and ecosystems, if that makes sense, so that everybody is kind of codependent and so that you have a concept of care that wraps around that individual, rather than having that individual having to navigate through a bunch of different systems and a bunch of different networks to try and get the help that they need. And so one of the perfect examples of this, that we saw was up in Lewiston, where everybody that needed to know about Robert Card knew about Robert Card. Local mental health knew about them, local police knew about them, even the military knew about Robert Card in Lewiston. And we have when we talk about prevention, those institutions usually have what we would look for as a more of a preparedness or preparing to respond type approach, not necessarily a very upstream prevention type approach. So the story that was told to me from my contacts up in Maine was that Robert was put on basically a watch list when when his family reported to the local police that they were worried that he was going to do something. The standard operating procedures for the Lewiston Police Department was to give him a 2-week window. If he did anything within those 2 weeks, they would be able to pick him up. Nothing happened within those 2 weeks, and there wasn't anything in that SOP of cycling back up the chain or connecting to another agency to go and talk to Robert, see how he was doing, check in with his family to see if he had gotten any better. And so that kind of holistic approach is something that we have been championing for a number of years now, and part of that is through public awareness and education, also the establishment of behavioral threat assessment and management teams, and linking support services in that whole of community type approach. So ingredients of a successful local prevention model. So these aren't a absolute recipe, but these are some of the things that we encourage in order to get a successful prevention model. And one of those things is broad a set of stakeholders. So really looking outside the box at the institutions that you have within and in your community and the groups that you have in your community. So we've had a lot of success with connecting with school bus drivers, the sanitation department, UPS, FedEx, Amazon drivers, departments of recreation, houses of worship, things sort of outside the typical public health, law enforcement, school district type of things for prevention models. Awareness of radicalization in the violence process. We'll talk about that very soon. And other trainings in behavioral threat and assessment teams in the variety of local programs that you probably already have, but don't necessarily look at themselves as doing prevention. So this is kind of like an illustration of sort of a very emergency management like a whole of community approach to sort of things. We're up there in the prevention. We look at things like active shooter drills or cameras at different facilities, metal detectors, things like that, in the protection, not necessarily prevention. So when I talk about prevention, I am talking about more human-to-human interactions rather than sort of physical security or response type of initiatives. And so here's the difference between sort of systems and concepts. So as you see the blue circles, those would be sort of our systems, and then the state prevention strategy kind of ties all of those together, and one different system feeds into the other and vice versa. So there's a sort of a codependency there, and you get more of an ecosystem where one action from one system triggers another system from another, if that makes sense. And that's kind of what we are striving for in all of our states. One of the things that we do have to help this along is a grants program, a very robust grants program. In fact, a number of Vermont institutions have applied for grant money from us. I do not, as the regional prevention coordinator for Vermont and the New England region, have any say in who wins grant money and how much, but what I can be is a conduit to our grants team and office and help you along the process as much as I'm allowed to in providing success stories of past people awardees, what we are sort of looking for, et cetera, et cetera. So if you are interested in applying for some money for a prevention strategy, I will provide my contact information at the end of this, and I am very, very happy to walk you through that whole process there. As you can see, over the last couple of years, we've dished out about 50 million. This current FY, we took a bit of a hit, but for the next 2 years, we're going to be doling out $15 million across the country to different prevention efforts. So again, I don't want to belabor this point a little bit. So if you are interested in knowing more about the grants program, you can go to the website, or you can just talk to me directly, and I'd be happy to have that conversation with you. These are some of the things that we focus area on. Again, like I said, we focus more on human-to-human prevention efforts. So we won't do the site assessments and stuff like that. That's more with Gabe. So if you are interested in more of those like hard site or more of the active shooter trainings and response things, those would be more with the CISA and Gabe's area of the house here at DHS. We're more on the human-to-human kind of stuff. Bystander training, youth resilience, it's media literacy, et cetera, et cetera. So understanding radicalization and mobilization of violence. So one of the things that is important to understand, not just the fact that, we have civil liberties and considerations. I am not so much concerned with the what is getting people motivated to commit violence. I am more concerned with the behaviors. So my battle is not with any type of ideology or any type of political movement or anything like that. My battle is with the behaviors. If you have the risk factors and you are exhibiting the behavioral indicators that we have seen time and time again from people who are motivated on various spectrums and have various different motives for their violence, but all share the same risk factors and all share the same behavioral indicators, that's where my battle lies. To get down a little bit of a rabbit hole on the mentality of attackers, it is very hard for me to kind of sit there and say that somebody who wants to commit targeted violence or a mass attack isn't mentally ill. But technically, from the definition, most individuals are mentally unhealthy. So they have stressors, poor coping skills. They've been isolated from their communities. They have identity issues. They have purpose issues, and they become sort of pathologically fixated. So that's not to really give you the warm and fuzzies, but from an intervention side, there are much more robust ways to deal with somebody who is mentally unhealthy than with somebody who is mentally ill. I'll go back to sort of this idea of what we call ICP, or identity, community, and purpose. These are kind of the three buckets that all individuals kind of seek to fill. And then if one of those goes down, you begin to see individuals look for something called hard matter, that we call it. So that can be political, religious, social, genealogical issues that then fill those buckets. And that's not just for teenagers. We see individuals who have spent time in the military for 30 plus years. They get out, they retire, and their identity has taken a hit. Their purpose is taking a hit. All of their friends were part of their military community or their work, and everything has been shaken up. A death in the family of somebody very prominent. Individuals who have been taking care of a loved one for a very, very long time. That becomes their purpose, their identity, etc. That individual goes away. They look for something to sort of fill that void. And so that's one of the indicators that an individual will seek. And then what they do is, if somebody on a political movement or a religious movement or a social movement begins to feed into those identity and that community and that purpose, they begin to sort of gravitate towards those things. So it's one thing to be radicalized. It is another thing to radicalize to violence. So you can be radicalized and not feel that violence is going to be the answer for what your grievance might be. And so radicalization also takes a very, very long time. It is made up of a lot of different experiences, different interactions, etc., that sort of formalize your radicalization. So nobody just sort of gets up in the morning, sees something on TV or hears something in town and becomes radicalized. It's a much longer process. It is often a very gray and murky process. There are a lot of things that don't associate themselves necessarily with violent behavior or radicalized behavior, that get sort of built up over time. So this becomes very, very present with sort of our more younger individuals, where, an incident at school might happen in 6th grade. We take that as just sort of one incident. The next incident that might happen that might contribute to a radicalization might be in high school, or it might be in college. So the time frames of trying to connect these dots becomes very, very difficult in real time. It's only until an attack actually happens that we're able to see the character arc of these individuals and sort of pinpoint, oh, there was a point, there was a point, and there was a point, and that kind of created this individual, and got him to radicalize, or her to radicalize. That becomes sort of where our prevention strategy kind of goes into, of understanding that some of those very innocuous, non-threatening events in a person's life might really be contributing to their radicalization. Conversely, mobilization to violence, that does happen sort of on a very closed time set. It's a much faster time set. It is something that you will see on the news, or somebody will tell somebody something, and they feel, okay, now's the time to go. You'll see at the bottom there, the pathway to violence. It's pretty self-explanatory. The one thing that I will say is that individuals don't follow that line just absolutely exactly. You can sort of go back and forth along that line, but for the most part, it will go in that order. The other thing that you'll see there, sort of right before the attack, is the probing and the breaching. This, if you've dealt with individuals who are suicidal, and we have a lot of evidence that a lot of our active shooters, our mass attackers, are suicidal. So people who have dealt with individuals who want to commit suicide will find that they do the same thing. They probe and they breach. They kind of test the waters to see what reactions are going to come. They test to see if anybody's going to care, if anybody's going to try and intervene before they go and they commit their suicide or commit their attack. So it's very, very similar. So if you have, we've had very good success within the region in a lot of different states of sort of piggybacking off of suicide prevention efforts. So if your locality has a suicide prevention sort of initiative or something like that, this might be a way to sort of just piggyback on some of this early prevention stuff, since so many of our attackers do have some type of suicidal ideation. Risk factors and protective factors. So risk factors, you can have a number of risk factors. You can have almost all of these risk factors. That doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to commit, or that you are even radicalizing or anything like that. So these are just things that sort of contribute to the stressors, contribute to individuals' struggles that we have seen that are common with people who have committed acts of violence, but is in no way a predictor of violent behavior. As to indicators, so behavioral indicators are more predictive. They are things that are usually very observable. They're the things that get people more and more concerned and upset about either their well-being, or their town and their community's well-being, and these are predictive. So these are the things that, when I said that, this is sort of like my battle is with behaviors, these are the things that I'm sort of looking out for and want to try and off ramp these individuals as quickly as possible if they're beginning to showcase some of these indicators. So what are these indicators? And so here are a few of them. Some of them are obviously very overt. Some of them can be a little less overt, in understanding the pathway, where they might be, understanding elevation if you're beginning to talk to these people, is one of the things that we would want to look out for. Just kind of continued unusual acquisition of weapons, expressed or implied intent, preoccupation or fixation, and also I would throw in there isolation. We see this as a major common theme where people will isolate themselves. They will become detached from society, from their friends, from their family. Sometimes because they believe that their family doesn't support their whatever they are fixated on. Sometimes it's because they have been ostracized, but isolation is a huge component to not only a risk factor but also an indicator of potential violent behavior. Obviously, the online environment is where a lot of radicalization happens. We won't go too much into it. I think there's enough out there that we kind of know, where these sites are, how these sites get promoted. Actually, a very unique thing with the online environment, the one website that has the most radicalized material on it is actually YouTube. So we think that it is these individuals going to these black websites or these Telegram sites, or it's encrypted, and they're talking on chat forums and things like that. They're actually not doing that as much anymore. They're actually looking at videos that are amplifying their pre-existing grievances. They're sharing the videos online and things like that. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic where YouTube has some of the most restrictive or of content restrictions, and yet they are one of the largest repositories of extremist content. So I'm not naive enough to know that, I'm with the federal government. I understand that. So I'm not going to get into a conversation about misinformation, disinformation, or malinformation. I will save everybody's, all joking aside. What I will say about this is that if you believe it, you will find it in today's environment. So there will be websites that will showcase, different studies. There will be documentaries that will amplify a grievance. So it is a force multiplier. The other thing about misinformation and disinformation and malinformation is that these are all things that sort of we use to win an argument. We use data. We think we're using facts. We're doing data, facts, things like that don't actually move the needle on human behavior. They have found to actually compound a grievance. So if you go and you try to win an argument, or you are trying to convince somebody who you believe is being radicalized with facts or with figures or anything like that, to try and showcase them that no, their facts are wrong, they actually retreat and become more hardened in their grievance, because there is so much information out there that can back up their way of doing things, or their way of seeing things rather, they repel against that. So it's one of those things when you are interacting with an individual who you think might be radicalizing. One of the things that we mention, and I'll mention it later actually in this presentation, is to just ask curious questions to get within that person's sort of circle of trust. Because like I said, the more isolation that an individual has, the more they sort of feed into their grievance. So the public health approach to violence prevention, this is where we're more into the conceptuals, the whole of community approach. I do know that within the state of Vermont a few years ago, there was a study that was done, and they found for individuals who had committed suicide in the state of Vermont, 96% of those individuals within one calendar year had connection to one service. One social service within the state of Vermont. 72% of those individuals within the calendar year before their death had connection to 3 or more services. So I say that not to just highlight, the somewhat scary numbers there, but to also showcase that these aren't unknown entities to the community. Right? These are individuals who are already interacting with a lot of the systems that you have at the state and local level. And it is the interconnectivity within those systems and how they are talking and how the information is flowing that we are trying to sort of strengthen and augment and also bring about this more concept of care. I do know that there are states within the New England region who have analytics on their residents that can tell you almost from the week and day, if you are a first-time recipient of food stamps, you will have a housing crisis within X amount of time. The people that provide the food stamps do not contact or do not have any real connectivity to the housing crisis. So we have a system where the person in crisis is kind of navigating through these systems rather than having a sort of concept of care that happens around these individuals. So that's really where we're kind of moving into the violence prevention realm of trying to get as far upstream as we possibly can with these different risk factors, with the already established institutions within the states, to look forward leaning, to look side to side, and to really work as a unit rather than as a singular entity. So we're in the primary prevention space. So primordial and primary prevention. Again, secondary prevention is where we get into sort of our BTAMs, or behavioral threat assessment and management teams. As you go sort of down this list, the interventions become more aggressive, they become more costly, they become much more in a response mode. So if a behavioral assessment team is sort of activated, it means that that individual has already probably crossed a certain threshold where a behavioral threat assessment team needs to be activated. We are trying to get to a place where that doesn't happen, where sort of we are addressing issues with that individual early on, and getting them the help that they need before a threat actually happens. And so this is sort of my I call it the iceberg slide. So we're down in the blue and the green. As most of you have heard, like most of the iceberg is below the sea level. So we look at sort of the gray and the red area as sort of above sea level, and then the primary and primordial prevention is down below the sea level. One of the things that we have also noticed is that there's a lot more resources in primary and primordial prevention than people think. And it's not as big a lift for communities to talk to a Department of Rec, which we've had great success with in Vermont, talking to houses of worship and making partners and partnerships with those entities to help to funnel individuals to those institutions to get help, but also to provide information on individuals who might be struggling, right? So our departments of rec have been great at doing both. They might see something in an individual that isn't being shown up at school, or they know of individuals' family life that may not have come up in other avenues within that person's life. They can provide information on that. They can also be a conduit to help individuals, give them a purpose, give them a community, etc. So really thinking in that whole of community type of response. So these are some just New England examples. Obviously, the guy right there in the middle and the top is known probably to a number of you. That's Jason James Eaton, the Burlington shooter last Thanksgiving, I believe. So it does happen. We have a number of individuals. Each one of the states in New England is represented here. So there's Robert Card there in the top, what would be my top left. And then below him is John Medore, who is in New Hampshire. He shot up a hospital. We have Nathan Allen in Massachusetts, had a racial attack. We have right there in the lower right, the Rise of the Moors, which had a standoff with police on I-95 a couple of years ago, heading up to Maine. And then we have Nicholas Bruckner from Bristol, Connecticut, who invited police officers to his house, did a fake domestic violence call, and then proceeded to shoot the officers when they arrived. So I would also like to say that all these individuals had some type of, other than actually Nathan Allen, who is a outlier in a lot of different ways, all of these individuals had some type of concerned report for them. They had been in contact with either mental health services or with local police. These aren't international women of mystery. These are individuals that we know within our community that have caused concern, many of them for a number of years, but just for whatever reason haven't crossed some type of threshold, whether they haven't done anything overly illegal leading up to their attack, or they just have not gotten priority to other individuals who might be suffering a little bit, showing signs of greater suffering based on resources and stuff like that. So key prevention tool, behavioral threat assessment. Again, this is more of a response tool. It is within the prevention realm, but it is not as early. It's not primordial or primary. This is kind of within that secondary realm. We currently do not have any minimum standards for threat assessment. So if you go to one school district in Vermont and they have a behavioral threat assessment team, you have seen one behavioral threat assessment team. There is no unified way of doing behavioral threat assessment. There are a number of different resources that you can use, whether it's the CSTAG system or it is the ENTER system, which is actually out of DHS, which might be the closest thing we have to sort of a minimum standard application to threat assessment. But what most of those trainings do is focus a lot on the assessment. There is a real dip in the management. And What we have also found in working with our public health partners is that a lot of clinicians do not get proper training or don't get any training on management with violent ideation. So we have actually a grant with Boston Children's Hospital. There is a woman, Emma Cardelli, who has developed a TSAM. That is a training free of charge for any clinician and non-clinician who is in sort of a behavioral threat assessment team or deals with managing threat assessments. And she will go through, and it is a standardized sort of plug and play type thing. As I said earlier on, I'm not a mental health professional, so there are times when she gets into sort of her clinician speak and my eyes glaze over. But having watched her sort of present this training to a number of people, their eyes sort of light up, and this is a major need. Again, I am happy to connect anybody with Emma to get that free training and have that TSAM be implemented for any of your needs whatsoever. So keep that in mind as well. Multidisciplinary team. This kind of goes back to really like taking a look at what you've got within your community, what you have at your school or your emergency management office, what type of partners do you have, and how can we bring them together, and what little tidbits can they do, both from a reporting standpoint, but also getting individuals help. Bystanders. So part of our training, our more extensive training that we have, other than sort of this introductory training, is a bystander training. As you can see, 2/3 of attackers exhibited behaviors. More than half their attackers had concern at one point. We talked about the individuals who committed suicide in Vermont and the rates of those. So going back to, we know these people, we just need to sort of find a way to get them the help that they really need. And sometimes just addressing a certain risk factor that they may have in their life doesn't actually get down to the core issue. So really trying to take these individuals and wrap them with a bunch of different services, or at least get them talking about what their core issue might be, and try to pinpoint where those services can be. Sometimes they don't necessarily need a lot of social services. Sometimes they just need to know that there's somebody there that cares about them. And try to break the bonds of sort of the unhealthy communities or unhealthy purposes that they've identified with themselves, and start filling those buckets with more, healthy identities, healthy communities, and healthy purposes. What can you do? So this was one of the action items that you can see there at the bottom. Sort of stay non-judgmental. Again, you are not trying to convince these people. You're not trying to argue with these people. What you want to listen for is escalation. You want to be interested without challenging. You want to get them to know that they can sort of confide in you. They can tell you what they want to do, how they are going to do it, and you can sort of assess based on that where you might need to go and try to find some services. National prevention resources. So these are some of the things that we offer. Enter, I told you about this. This is sort of the closest thing that we have to a standardized behavioral threat assessment training. It is a rather long and in-depth training, but we do have a few master trainers, I believe, within the state of Vermont. If not, we have them throughout the New England area, who I'm sure will travel to Vermont to provide you with a training if you need it. But if you are interested, they have their own website. Again, if you want to talk to me more about applying to Enter, all the ins and outs of it, just let me know and I'll be happy to talk to you about that. They provide a lot of different resources, threat evaluations, agency needs a BTM trainer, et cetera, et cetera. You can see the website right there, and you can go to it to get more information. I do believe that they are more focused on providing this training for law enforcement entities, but there has been a lot of discussion over the years of branching out into other, letting more of the general public sort of in on this. So that is something that I can work with you, talk to Evan at Enter, and see if we can sort of get you in a spot if you are interested, if you're not law enforcement. Our prevention resource finder. So this is sort of a one-stop shop for us and for you to sort of see other things that are going around. So whether it's grant funding, you want to go through the grants and see who has a grant in your area, what grants were successful. You can see that there. Information sharing platforms, different resources from all the other federal agencies that sort of deal or have some type of study within the violence prevention stuff, training opportunities. Again, everything that comes out of CP3, CISA is typically free, is free of charge. Certainly all the trainings at CP3 are free of charge. So do take advantage of a lot of those training opportunities. We do national webinars, we do regional webinars, et cetera, and then evidence-based research to help you in just sort of formulating this approach, how it works, different case studies and things like that. See something, say something. This is something that we've actually been talking about. I'm in DC right now for our annual meeting, which is why I couldn't join all of you today. And see something, say something is something that we have been talking about, does this need sort of a 2.0 kind of revamp? Most people associate this with either a lone bag at a train station or a suspicious behavior or things like that. What we've been sort of saying is that this does work. 2/3 of bystanders were concerned. People are reporting. It's encouraging. We do encourage people to report. It's really working with the states and working with the locals of where are they reporting to and how is that information funneled to the appropriate entities. So we still bang the drum of see something, say something, and we encourage everybody at the local level to do the same. And then this is where I kind of like reach out to you and say sort of, well, what kind of local prevention programs exist in your region or in your locale? How do you get involved? One of the things that I hold is a quarterly meeting every 3 or 4 months. Emily is on that and has been on that for quite a while. I'm very thankful for that. It's a great opportunity and it's open to anyone. So it's a great opportunity for people within the state of Vermont to sort of figure out and find out what things are happening within Vermont within the prevention space and where they might be able to fit, where they might be able to partner with. It's also a great opportunity to find out what other things are happening in the region. So what is Rhode Island doing in terms of prevention? What is Maine doing? What is Connecticut doing? So I provide that information. It's also a great place to amplify any initiatives that you're having. If you're having a conference or if you're having a webinar or if you're having a training, to advertise that to a larger audience. And you will also get sort of the inside track on any kind of grants information. So as I hear things about grants, whether we're going to concentrate this next year on X or Y, you'll be able to get the inside track. When the notification of funding opportunities will be released, you'll get that information, et cetera. So all you have to do is email me. I don't, I don't pull any information from anybody. I push all this information, but if you want to join onto that call, all you have to do is just email me and I'll put you on the list. And actually, I think coming up in a few weeks here, we'll have our next quarterly meeting with the state of Vermont. So it's a perfect time to test and see how it is. And if it works for you, great. And if it doesn't, no obligation to continue it.